My dad forgot to hang up. I heard, "She's a burden." I sold my $980K home and disappeared. They returned to find the house empty and a note. "A burden did this." The thing about hearing your own parents call you a burden is that some part of you already knew. That's the part that makes it unbearable. I wasn't on the phone with them. They didn't mean to call me. My father's coat pocket pressed some sequence of buttons in a restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona, and my number, their daughter's number, came up and the phone connected, and I was standing at my kitchen sink scrubbing a casserole dish when I heard my mother's laugh cut through the ambient noise of a nice dinner. I almost hung up. I almost said, "Dad, you pocket dialed me," and I almost laughed, and nothing would have changed. Instead, I turned off the faucet and I listened. My name is Annabelle Croft. I'm 34 years old, and up until 8 months ago, I owned a 4-bedroom craftsman-style home in Clover Ridge, Virginia, that my grandmother left me in her will, not split between relatives, not auctioned to cover estate costs, left specifically, deliberately to me alone, because my grandmother, Frances Croft, was the only person in my family who truly saw me and decided I was worth something. I need you to understand what that house meant before I tell you what happened to it. Frances bought it in 1971 for $32,000. She repainted it herself every 6 years, always the same soft gray blue that she said matched the sky after a summer storm. She planted an oak tree in the backyard when my mother was born, and by the time I was a child, that tree was enormous, the kind of tree you could disappear into. I used to sit up in that tree with a book and a peanut butter sandwich on Saturday mornings, and Frances would look up at me from her garden and say, "There's my girl, not my granddaughter, not Annabelle, my girl." She died when I was 26. She left me the house outright, no mortgage, fully paid. The only condition in her handwritten letter, not even legally binding, just a note tucked inside the will, was that I take care of the oak tree. I did. I take care of things. That's always been my problem. My parents moved in with me 3 years ago. It started, as these things always do, with a crisis that wasn't quite a crisis. My father, Gerald Croft, had retired early from his career in commercial real estate consulting and immediately discovered that he had nothing he wanted to do and nowhere affordable to do it. They'd been renting a condo in Scottsdale since they sold their Maryland house to fund a lifestyle they hadn't quite accounted for, and when the rent jumped $1,200, my mother called me crying. "We're looking at options," she said, which meant she had already decided. I said yes. I always said yes. They were supposed to stay for 6 months. A bridge, I told myself, just a bridge. I gave them the 2 upstairs bedrooms and my grandmother's sitting room as a personal space. I cooked dinners. I drove my father to his cardiology appointments when his AFib flared up. I paid for their Netflix, their streaming services, their grocery bills when my father said the Social Security check was tight that month. I never asked them to pay rent, not once. In return, my mother rearranged my kitchen without asking and told me my decor was very sparse, Annabelle, and my father put his enormous leather recliner in the living room directly in front of the window, where Frances's orchids used to get sunlight, and the orchids died, and my father said he didn't see what the big deal was. They stayed for 3 years. I want to be honest with you. I am not blameless in this. I enabled it. I said yes every time. I let them slowly rearrange my life around their comfort, because my entire childhood had been one long lesson in making myself smaller, so my parents had more room. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because it explains why the house phone showed their names in my contacts under Mom and Dad, and not warning, the Tuesday it happened, I had gotten home late from work. I'm a senior contract analyst for a logistics firm. Essentially, I review and negotiate vendor agreements, which means I read very carefully and I notice discrepancies, and I do not let things go. That skill would become relevant shortly. The faucet in my kitchen had been leaking for a week. Not a dramatic leak, a slow, persistent drip that I'd been meaning to address. I remembered seeing the warranty paperwork for the fixture in a folder my parents had casually moved to a shelf in the garage because they'd needed the kitchen drawer for their own things. I called my father to ask if he remembered where he'd put it. He didn't answer, but his phone answered, and the background sound was a restaurant. The warm murmur of a nice place, glasses clinking, low music. They'd told me they were having dinner with neighbors, but the neighbors had a perfectly good house. This sounded like somewhere with tablecloths. I almost hung up. I didn't. My mother's voice. "She won't fight it. You know how she is. She feels guilty about everything. Mention the back pain, mention the doctor bills, and she'll sign whatever we put in front of her." I went completely still. There are moments in life where your entire relationship with someone reframes itself in real time, where you watch years of memories rearrange themselves into a pattern you should have recognized but didn't because you were inside it. This was that moment. I was watching my childhood from the outside for the first time, and what I saw was not what I had told myself it was. My father's voice, easy and confident. "By next year, the deed will have our names on it. She's always asking how she can help, so we'll just tell her how." A pause, the sound of something being poured. Then my mother. "She won't even realize what she signed until it's too late." And then my father said it. Not with cruelty, not even with particular emphasis. He said it the way you state an obvious, settled fact, the way you'd say water is wet or it's cold in December. "She's always been a burden." My mother laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, loose and genuine, like he'd said something they'd both been thinking for years. "To us," she agreed, "and now the house will make up for it." The call ended 40 seconds later when someone bumped the phone and disconnected it. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I looked at my kitchen, at the orchidless windowsill, at the rearranged cabinets, at my grandmother's old ceramic cookie jar that my mother had moved to the top of the refrigerator because it cluttered the counter, and I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't call them. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought for a very long time. When I finally lay down, I stared at the ceiling until 2 a.m., not panicking, not spinning, just building, planning, because my father was right about one thing. I had always known how to take care of things. They were leaving for Italy in 2 days. This was the vacation I had funded, $4,200 for flights, plus the villa rental, plus spending money I'd wired them in March because my mother said their travel card had an issue, and could I just spot them, they'd pay me back. They had not paid me back. They never paid me back. This was the pattern, and I had maintained it faithfully for 34 years. The Italy trip meant 10 days. 10 days where they would be unreachable and jet-lagged and busy performing the leisure of people who had figured out how to make life comfortable for themselves. 10 days was more than I needed. At 8:15 the following morning, I called Vivian Park, my property attorney, a woman I'd retained 3 years earlier when I first had my will reviewed after Frances died. I had asked her then whether there was anything I needed to do to protect the property, and she had explained my rights clearly and thoroughly, the way she did everything, and I had filed the information away. Now I needed to use it. Vivian, I said, I need to sell the house, fast, off-market, cash, no listing. A pause, not a surprised one. Vivian Park, JD, 14 years in property law, does not do surprised. Timeline? The buyers need to close before I leave town. I'm leaving in 10 days. I know a buyer who has been looking in Clover Ridge. Cash, no contingencies. They've been waiting for something off-market. How fast? I can have paperwork drafted by end of day. Do it. I need to be very clear about something. The house was mine, free and clear. My name alone on the deed. My grandmother had made sure of it. She had, in fact, had Vivian's predecessor in that same office review the bequest specifically to make sure there were no shared claims. There was nothing fraudulent about what I was doing. I was selling my own property. That's not a crime. My parents had no legal right to that house. They had never had it. They had only ever had my guilt, and I was done being managed by it. 46 hours later, I signed the closing paperwork in Vivian's office on the 14th floor of a downtown Richmond building. The buyer, a developer named Marcus Leith, shook my hand and said it was a beautiful property. I thanked him. I did not look at the check for very long. I already knew the number, $980,000. Every cent of it moved into a new account my parents didn't know existed, at a bank they'd never heard me mention. I drove them to the airport myself. This is the part I replay sometimes, and I don't know exactly how to feel about it. I was composed. I was pleasant. I listened to my mother describe the villa they'd booked, a farmhouse outside Siena, stone floors, a lemon grove, and I said it sounded beautiful. I watched my father haul his carry-on out of my trunk with the grunt he always performed to remind people his back hurt, and I did not comment. At the departures terminal, my mother hugged me. She was wearing the silk scarf I'd bought her for her birthday in February, aubergine, hand-printed, from a boutique in Georgetown that I'd spent 20 minutes researching because she'd mentioned once that she wanted something Italian. I had bought it before the phone call. I note this not with bitterness, but with a kind of exhausted clarity. She smelled like her perfume. She said, "Don't forget to water the plants, Annabelle." I said, "I'll take care of everything," and I meant it. I watched their flight disappear. Then I went back to my grandmother's house, my house for 9 more days, and I began. I walked the house with a yellow legal pad and a thermos of coffee, and I made 3 columns at the top of a page. Mine, theirs, trash. I was methodical, and I was honest. The furniture Frances had left me, mine. The kitchen equipment I'd bought myself, mine. My books, my work files, my grandmother's ceramic cookie jar, the photo albums, the art on the walls I'd chosen, the oak tree in the backyard that I'd had professionally trimmed twice, mine. My father's recliner, theirs. My mother's extensive collection of decorative figurines, theirs. Their clothing, their documents, their medications, their kitchen additions, the Turkish rug my mother had brought without asking and placed over Frances's original hardwood, as if the hardwood weren't beautiful on its own, theirs. A few things were genuinely ambiguous, and I was generous in those cases. If I wasn't sure, it went in the theirs column. I hired a moving crew for my things, white glove service. Careful, efficient men who wrapped Frances's china in tissue paper and carried the framed photographs like they were fragile, which they were. My belongings went to a storage unit in Richmond, and then to the apartment I had already leased under a new address I'd chosen specifically because it was not listed anywhere associated with my name yet. My parents' things went to a separate storage facility in Clover Ridge, 10 minutes from the house. I paid 6 months of rent upfront under their names, using a cashier's check. I taped a note with the unit number and access code to the inside flap of an envelope and left it in the storage unit itself, which meant they'd only find it after they figured out where their things had gone. I am not a cruel person. I want to be clear about that. I made sure their things were safe. I made sure they had access to them. I made sure there was a path forward, even if it was one they'd have to find themselves. On the last morning, the house was empty. My footsteps echoed. I walked every room one final time. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the windowsill where the orchids should have been. I stood in the backyard and put my hand on the oak tree. Frances's oak tree, older than me, older than my parents' marriage, older than any plan my father had ever made. The new owners had agreed, in writing, to maintain it. I had made that a term of sale. Marcus Leith had said, absolutely, of course, and I believed him, because it was in the contract. And Vivian Park does not leave things out of contract. contracts. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. I taped one note to the inside of the garage window, facing outward, printed in clean 24-point type on a single sheet of paper. A burden did this. Then I got in my car and I drove. I was 210 miles away when my neighbor Carrie texted me at 4:14 p.m. They're here. I pulled into a rest stop. I put the car in park. I sat with my hands in my lap and I let myself imagine the scene. The Uber from the airport, my mother in her Italian souvenir sunglasses, my father's carry-on with the broken wheel he'd never gotten fixed, both of them sun-tired and expectant, the familiar street, the familiar house, except the for sale sign was already gone because the listing had never been public, and the lockbox was gone. And when my father pressed his key into the lock, it would not turn, because the locks had been changed that morning by a locksmith named Derek, whom I had paid in cash. Carrie's next text came at 4:17. Your dad is kicking the door. Your mom is screaming into her phone. This is intense, Annabelle. Are you okay? I texted back, I'm okay. Please don't engage with them. You don't owe them anything. The voicemails began at 4:23. My father first, voice controlled, speaking the way he spoke when he was certain he was the most reasonable person in any room. Annabelle, there has clearly been some kind of mistake with the locksmith or the property manager, or just call me back. This is going to be fine, but you need to call me back immediately. My mother at 4:31, softer, searching for a register that would unlock me. Sweetheart, we just got home and something's wrong with the house. We're confused. Are you okay? Please call us. A neighbor, not Carrie, at 4:38. Someone I didn't know well, concerned, relaying that my parents were distressed and asking if I could call. My father again at 4:52. The controlled tone was gone. Annabelle, we found the note. A burden did this? That's supposed to be clever? This is illegal. Do you understand me? You have committed fraud. You had no right to. This house is family property, and I am calling a lawyer tonight. We will sue you for everything. Every penny. You ungrateful, selfish. He ran out of steam somewhere in there, or ran out of recording time. The message cut off. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Then I deleted the next one, and the next. I want to be honest. There was a version of me, the version I had been for 34 years, who would have listened to my mother's soft, confused voice and felt the familiar gravitational pull of guilt, who would have called back, who would have said, I can explain or let me fix this, or, worst of all, I'm sorry. I listened to her voicemail. I noticed the pull. I noticed it the way you notice a smell from a place you used to live. Familiar, briefly overwhelming, and then just a thing that existed once. I deleted it. Here is what my parents did not know about me. They did not know that I had spent the previous 8 months, before the phone call even, quietly consulting with a therapist named Dr. Renata Sousa, a specialist in family systems and enmeshment patterns, whose office was in a building I specifically chose because it was not near anything my parents frequented. I had started seeing her because I had begun, slowly, to feel that something about my relationship with my parents was not right in a way I couldn't name. I had not named it yet. The phone call named it for me. After the phone call, I had called Dr. Sousa immediately. I think you already knew something like this was possible, she said, during our session 2 days before my parents left for Italy. The guilt patterns, the financial compliance, the housing situation. You've described a dynamic that was always oriented around managing their needs at the expense of your own. You've called it love, but love doesn't require you to disappear. She also, critically, referred me to a colleague, Dr. Alan Ferris, a therapist who specialized in adult survivors of emotional coercion, and was also a licensed consultant to several family law attorneys in the state. He was the one who told me, carefully and professionally, that what my parents had been discussing on that phone call, using guilt and manufactured helplessness to manipulate me into signing over a deed, had a name. It was called undue influence, and in some circumstances, depending on how far it progressed, it could constitute fraud. He told me to keep the recording. I had already saved it in 3 places: cloud backup, a flash drive in my car's glove compartment, and an email I'd sent to myself with the subject line, evidence, do not delete. Then there was Vivian Park, my property attorney. We had now spent considerable time together, and she knew the full story. They have no legal standing, she told me during our final pre-closing meeting, her voice as level as a table. The property was yours alone. The sale was legal. They cannot sue you for selling your own house. She paused. If they attempt to pursue any action claiming fraud or theft, I'll represent you. I'd enjoy that, actually. I believed her. Here is what they tried. 3 days after the discovery, I received an email from a law firm called Gentry and Moorfield, LLP, based in Scottsdale. A letter signed by a paralegal, not even an attorney, informing me that my parents had engaged the firm to explore their options and that I should expect to hear from them regarding claims of improper property transfer and financial manipulation. I forwarded it to Vivian. She responded in 11 minutes. This firm does real estate closings and DUIs. They're not going to touch this. I'll draft a response. Her response was 2 pages long and included, attached as Exhibit A, a certified copy of the deed transfer, and as Exhibit B, a transcript of the relevant portions of the phone call recording, with a note that the original audio file was available upon request. I received no further communications from Gentry and Moorfield, LLP. My mother, meanwhile, had launched a campaign through the extended family. My Aunt Susan called me, genuinely concerned, not malicious, and said she'd heard I'd done something with the house, and my parents were devastated. I explained the situation. I played her 90 seconds of the audio. There was a long silence. Annabelle, she said finally. finally. I need you to know that I always thought something was off with how they talked about you. She has not called my parents back. My cousin Daniel, who had always privately suspected that my parents were a lot, texted me, heard what happened. Good for you. I mean that. My father reached out to 2 of his old business contacts, trying to build a narrative in which he was the victim of a deranged daughter. One of them, a man named Richard Holloway, who'd known my father for 20 years, called me directly. Gerald is telling people you defrauded him, he said, not unkindly. I want to hear your side. I told him my side. I played him the recording. Richard Holloway said, I've known your father a long time, Annabelle. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner whether he treated you right. He has not returned my father's calls since. There's a question I've been asked since all of this that I want to address. Did I feel guilty? Yes. I want to be specific about what kind of guilt it was, though, because it matters. It was not guilt about selling the house. It was not guilt about the note or the storage unit or the new phone number. It was the old, trained guilt, the reflex that had been installed in me over 3 decades, the Pavlovian flinch that arrived whenever I did anything for myself that inconvenienced them. It was the guilt of a child who was taught that her own needs were inconveniences and who had learned to apologize for taking up space. Dr. Sousa and I spent a lot of time with that guilt. Notice it, she said. Name it. Ask it what it wants from you. And then decide, based on what you actually know to be true, whether it deserves to be honored. What I actually knew to be true. I had a right to my own house. I had a right to my own money. I had a right to leave. And I had a right to protect myself from people who had, on a recorded phone call, in their own voices, laughed about making me sign away everything Francis had given me. The guilt didn't go away, but I stopped letting it drive. 9 weeks after I left, I got a certified letter at my new address. Vivian had handled the paperwork to protect it, so I still don't know how they found it, though I have suspicions about a mutual contact from my parents, not their lawyer, from them directly. My mother had written it. I could tell by the handwriting and by the particular way it opened. We are reaching out because we feel there has been a terrible misunderstanding. It went on for 4 pages. There was no acknowledgement of the phone call. There was no apology. There was an extensive recounting of everything they had done for me over my life, driving me to school, paying for a semester of college, being always there. That was framed as evidence of a debt I owed. There were references to my father's health and my mother's stress and how the situation had impacted them. There was a suggestion that I had misinterpreted the phone call, that I had taken things out of context, that if I would only talk to them, we could sort this out as a family. The final paragraph asked if I would consider letting them stay with me temporarily while they got back on their feet. They were still in Clover Ridge, living at a residence inn, depleting what savings they had at $180 a night. I read the letter twice. Then I wrote a single-sentence response, which Vivian mailed for me on official letterhead. Ms. Croft is not able to offer housing accommodations. She wishes you well in securing alternative arrangements. I have not heard from them since. My grandmother planted that oak tree in 1969, actually. I said 1971 before, and I want to correct it. She told me the exact year once, sitting in the garden, squinting up at the branches. She said she planted it the year she knew she was going to be okay. The year she paid off the mortgage alone, after my grandfather left, and realized she didn't need anyone to save her because she had already saved herself. She didn't tell me that story as a lesson. She told it the way she told all her stories. Matter-of-factly, like it was simply a thing that had happened to her. But I have thought about it my entire life. Marcus Leith sent me a photograph last month. He does this occasionally. Small updates, which I didn't expect but have come to appreciate. The photograph showed the backyard in late-season gold, the oak tree enormous and unchanged. Its roots so deep now, they'll outlast every plan anyone has ever made in that house. I saved it to my phone. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember what it feels like to be rooted in yourself. I am writing this from my apartment in Richmond. I have a good job that I am good at. I have a therapist I see every other Thursday. I have a small circle of people who know the full story and love me without requiring anything in return. I have a savings account that belongs entirely to me. I have a new number that my parents don't have. I don't have the house. I want to say that plainly, because sometimes the internet treats these stories like the justice is complete, like selling the house and leaving the note was the ending, tidy and satisfying. But I grew up in that house. Francis was in every wall of it. The oak tree in the backyard was older than my sadness. On some days, the loss of it sits very heavy. But here is what else I have, and what I want to leave you with. I have the recording, clear as glass, saved in 3 places. She's always been a burden, said easily without cruelty, the way you say a thing you've known for years and are tired of pretending otherwise. I have that. Not because I needed evidence for a lawsuit. Vivian says I was never in legal jeopardy, but because there is something clarifying about evidence. There is something about having the truth in an undeniable form that makes the gaslighting impossible. They cannot call me delusional. They cannot say I misheard or misread or invented it. They said what they said. I have the note. A burden did this. People have asked me if I regret that line, whether it was too theatrical, too obvious. I've thought about it a lot. I keep coming back to the same answer. No, because it wasn't about cleverness. It wasn't about punishing them, though I'll admit there was some satisfaction in it. It was about the record. It was about standing in my grandmother's house, the house my grandmother left me because she believed I was worth something, and making sure the last sentence written there, the last mark left in that space, was in my handwriting and said what I needed it to say. I carried that word my whole life. Burden. I wore it the way you wear something that was handed to you so young you forgot it wasn't yours. I wore it through every yes I didn't mean, and every guilt-funded vacation and every holiday dinner where I cooked and cleaned and absorbed the ambient contempt of two people who had never once considered what it cost me. They called me that like it was a fact of nature, so I made sure the last thing they read in my grandmother's house was proof that I had finally, irrevocably put it down. If you're reading this and you recognize something in it, the compliance, the trained smallness, the guilt that arrives before you've even decided anything, I want to tell you something Frances told me once, from the garden, her hands full of dirt. You don't owe anyone the life they planned for you. She said it like it was simple. I'm working on believing it was.